the night of October 29th, 2012, and Fire Chief Marty Ingram is wading chest deep through floodwater in the Breezy Point neighborhood of Queens, New York, trying to reach a fire. Not a house fire, but an entire neighborhood is burning, and it is also underwater.
Is destroyed. It feels like it's like the apocalypse.
Behind them, the Atlantic Ocean is still rising. In front of them, the sky above Queens is glowing orange. What they are about to witness has never happened in this city before.
And, you know, if it was a Disney surround movie, it would have been beautiful. But this thing was real, and it was scary.
October 2012. New York City is quiet, calm, completely unaware of what is building out in the Atlantic. Halloween decorations hang from brownstone stoops across Brooklyn. The subway rumbles beneath Manhattan's streets, as it has for over 100 years, uninterrupted. To most of the 8.3 million people living here, a hurricane feels like something that happens somewhere else. To the Gulf Coast, to the Carolinas. Not here. But forecasters at the NHC, or the National Hurricane Center, had been watching something deeply unsettling develop far out in the Atlantic for days. On October 22nd, a tropical depression forms in the western Caribbean Sea. Within 24 hours, it becomes Tropical Storm Sandy.
Caribbean, Tropical Storm Sandy is expected to become a hurricane later today. It is heading toward Jamaica and Cuba and could affect the east coast of the U.S. this weekend. David Bernard, Chief Meteorologist.
By October 24th, Sandy is a Category 1 hurricane, tearing across Jamaica with 80 miles per hour winds. It then moves north and crosses Cuba. The storm weakens slightly over land, but then emerges back into warm Atlantic waters, where it begins to feed again. At its peak, Sandy reaches Category 3 strength with winds of 115 miles per hour. But what happens next is what separates Sandy from every other storm in living memory. A massive trough, essentially a dip in the jet stream where cold polar air plunges southward, is positioned perfectly to intercept Sandy as it tracks northward. Under normal circumstances, the jet stream would steer a hurricane out to sea, but this trough is acting like a trap, bending Sandy's path directly toward the northeast coast of the United States. What makes this even more terrifying is a process called extratropical transition, essentially the merging of a tropical hurricane with a cold continental weather system. Sandy doesn't simply weaken and die. It transforms. It expands. The storm loses its tight, organized eye, but gains something far more sinister. A wind field stretching over 500 miles in every direction. Meteorologists begin calling it something they've never called a storm before: a superstorm. The predicted storm surge, the wall of ocean water pushed inland by the storm's winds, is described in terms New Yorkers had never heard used about their city. Words like catastrophic, historic, unsurvivable. For a city built at sea level, crisscrossed by tunnels and surrounded on 3 sides by water, what is coming is almost incomprehensible. Mayor Bloomberg issues mandatory evacuation orders for over 375,000 residents.
The mandatory evacuation of homes and businesses. I can't stress enough that this is for your own safety, and that if you refuse to evacuate, you're not only putting yourself at risk, but also the first responders who will have to assist you in an emergency.
The Transit Authority shuts down the entire subway system for the first time in its 108-year history.
No New York City subways, buses, or trains are running this morning. Bridges and tunnels could be shut down next as the storm gets closer to shore.
These decisions would save countless lives, but not everyone listened. October 29th, 2012. The morning arrives gray and eerily calm. For many New Yorkers who chose to ride out the storm, Sandy still feels like something abstract, something on a screen. People in coastal Staten Island neighborhoods like Midland Beach and Oakwood Beach peek out of their doors. A little flooding in the streets, sure, but they'd seen that before. What they couldn't see from their windows was what the ocean was doing. Out in lower New York Bay, the water had been rising steadily for hours. Sandy's massive wind field was already pushing the Atlantic northward, funneling it directly into the geographic bottleneck of New York Harbor. The harbor compresses the surge as it moves from open water into the narrowing straits of the inner harbor. Every foot of water pushed in from the ocean had nowhere to go but up. At 4 p.m., the tide gauge at the southern tip of Manhattan begins to climb at an alarming rate.
Probably see that structure is being battered. What was really just a casual sitting area here just a little farther up the northwest side of Battery Park in lower Manhattan.
Water is splashing over the seawalls at the tip of lower Manhattan. Widespread flooding is the biggest concern in the nation's largest city as Hurricane Sandy approaches. Forecasters say the storm...
At 6 p.m., it surpasses the previous record set by Hurricane Donna in 1960. And Sandy hasn't even made landfall yet.
About 10 feet of storm surge combining with high tides and a full moon to create something we call a storm tide about 15 feet deep. And that will continue to deepen here overnight and into early morning hours tomorrow along coastal areas of New Jersey and Long Island.
Something big is about to happen. It's just a matter of when. At 7:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on October 29, 2012, Sandy makes landfall near Brigantine, New Jersey, as a post-tropical cyclone with sustained winds of 80 miles per hour.
Whoa! How did you do it?
Landfall barely matters at this point. Sandy's destruction had been underway for hours. What matters is the surge, and the surge is now arriving in New York. At 9:24 p.m., the tide gauge at the southern tip of Manhattan peaks at 14.08 feet above normal water levels, shattering every record in the station's 92-year history. The ocean has climbed nearly 4 feet higher than any record in the station's history. And in the low-lying communities of Staten Island, Queens, and Brooklyn, the water isn't just climbing walls, it is swallowing entire neighborhoods whole. Staten Island is the forgotten borough of New York City. Exposed on the edge of the harbor, separated from the rest of the city by the very water it faces. When Sandy's surge hits, it hits Staten Island like a wall. More than 20 of the city's storm deaths will occur here alone. But numbers alone cannot describe what happens on the night of October 29th. On Father Capodanno Boulevard along the Midland Beach waterfront, the ocean does not simply flood the street, it detonates across it. Residents who ignored evacuation orders watch from their windows as the water transforms from a puddle to a torrent in minutes. The surge peaks at over 14 feet. Homes that have stood for decades are shoved off their foundations and collapse into the churning black water below. And the water is still rising. George Dresch stays behind to protect his home as the floodwaters invade. The surge overwhelms the house before he and his daughter Angela can escape. Both are swept into the flooded streets. Miraculously, George's wife and other daughter had evacuated earlier. Unfortunately, George and young Angela would not survive. On nearby Fox Beach Avenue, Leonard Montalto watches the floodwaters engulf the first floor of his home. He helps his daughter to the safety of the second floor, then stays below to try and save what he can. When rescuers reached the neighborhood the following morning, Leonard's body would be found in the basement of his home. He is one of many who stayed to protect their homes, only to be overtaken by a surge no one expected. Simultaneously, 10 miles to the east, in the Breezy Point neighborhood of Queens, a different catastrophe is unfolding, one that would produce the most surreal images of the entire storm. Breezy Point is a tight-knit community sitting on a narrow barrier peninsula at the southwestern tip of Queens, surrounded on 3 sides by water. When Sandy's surge arrives, the streets flood nearly as fast as those in Staten Island. But the surge is not the only threat here. In the chaos of the flooding, an electrical fire breaks out near the oceanfront. Under normal circumstances, the FDNY would extinguish it within minutes, but the floodwater has rendered the streets impassable for fire trucks. Firefighters arrive on foot and by boat, wading through chest-deep water in impossible wind conditions. As they fight the blaze, the fire spreads, then spreads again. The wooden bungalow homes of Breezy Point, packed tightly along narrow lanes, become a tinderbox. Sandy's relentless wind fans the flames from house to house. From a distance, the image is incomprehensible. A neighborhood is on fire, and it is also underwater. By the time the fire is contained, more than 100 homes have been reduced to ash, leaving a field of scorched concrete slabs stretching for blocks. The neighborhood looks less like a place where people once lived, and more like the aftermath of a wartime bombing. Meanwhile, the surge is doing something engineers had long considered catastrophically unlikely. It is filling the New York City subway system. Water cascades down ventilation grates and tunnel entrances across Lower Manhattan. The tunnels connecting Brooklyn and Manhattan beneath the East River, built over decades and used by millions for over a century, begin filling like bathtubs. The Montague Street Tunnel, the Hugh Carey Tunnel, the Cranberry Street Tunnel, all submerged. The damage to a century of electrical infrastructure would take months and cost over $1 billion to repair. At the same moment, explosions rock the Con Edison substation on 14th Street as surge water contacts high-voltage equipment. A blue-white flash tears open the Manhattan skyline, visible from New Jersey and Brooklyn. Everything south of 34th Street goes dark. 8 million people across 17 states ultimately lose power, the largest outage in the history of the northeastern United States. At NYU Langone Medical Center, the surge disables the hospital's backup generators. Inside, 215 critically ill patients, including premature infants in the neonatal intensive care unit, must be evacuated mid-storm. Nurses and doctors carry infants down darkened stairwells, handbagging each baby to keep them breathing. Miraculously, every single patient is evacuated safely. Not one life is lost. By dawn on October 30th, Sandy has long passed, but the impacts are not. Dozens of lives lost in New York City alone. Across the United States, 117 people are killed directly by the storm. The total damage inflicted on the United States reaches over $65 billion, making Sandy the second costliest natural disaster in American history at the time, surpassed only by Hurricane Katrina. The subway remains shut for days, reopening only partially, with some lines out of service for months. In Staten Island, the hardest-hit neighborhoods receive far less aid and attention than communities in Manhattan and Brooklyn. Survivors describe feeling forgotten by the city they belong to. The disparity in recovery resources would become one of the most painful legacies of the storm. Breezy Point rebuilds, slowly and stubbornly. New homes rise where the old ones burned, but the footprints of over 100 foundations remain visible for years, a permanent reminder of the night the neighborhood burned while it drowned. In the years that follow, New York City fundamentally rethinks its relationship with the ocean. Flood maps are redrawn. Billions are committed to coastal infrastructure. Entire neighborhoods like Oakwood Beach are bought out by the state and returned to open land, because nature made clear it would take them back regardless. But some things cannot be engineered away. On the streets of Midland Beach, a small memorial stands near the spot where Glinda Moore's car was overtaken by the flood. 2 small trees were planted there, one for each of her boys. The storm that swallowed New York City for a single night left a hole in this city that no seawall will ever fill. Every storm eventually ends, but the way we hold each other, that remains. Take care of one another. If you made it this far, you clearly care about stories like this. Subscribe and leave a like. It helps push this video to more people and allows the channel to keep making documentaries like this. Stay alert and have a great day.